Well, let's talk now to Julia Manchester, who's a political reporter for the US website The Hill. Good to see you, Julia. Welcome to the programme. So, as we've been hearing there, this really the biggest day so far in the US presidential race. Almost a foregone conclusion as to who the candidates will be. Let's talk about Nikki Haley, who is still in the race. Lots of questions about what she will do next. What can she do? What do you think is going to happen with her?
Yeah, well, unless Nikki Haley runs out of money or her donors turn their backs on her, theoretically, she could stay in until the convention. You know, she lost a big donor from Charles Koch. Now, he is his political arm was backing her. He's a big conservative Republican donor here in the U.S., and he was really fueling her throughout Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina. How after she lost South Carolina, he stopped funding her. So, you know, her campaign has continued to fundraise. They have money. However, the question is what happens after today? If she doesn't have a good showing, there is a real concern, I think, that a lot of her donors will, stop funding her and she won't be able to keep going. But she says she's staying in the race so we don't have the longest general election in U.S. history. She thinks the part of the Republican Party that she represents, the more, maybe pre-Trump establishment part of the party decides, needs to be heard. So that's why she's staying in, but really unclear what her end game in all of this, because it seems that the writing is on the wall.
Well, as you say, it seems like the writing's on the wall. We pretty much know it's going to be Trump versus Biden. We've been here before, obviously. But what have been the issues this time that will change voters' minds? We know, of course, that the economy is a big one, the cost of living that matters to voters. Has that mattered this time?
It does matter, absolutely. And I think that's going to be a real question for President Biden going into the general election. In terms of the Republican primary, I mean, look, I think all of these Republican primary voters want an alternative to President Biden. You have Nikki Haley and Donald Trump offering very, similar visions. But what Donald Trump is pointing to was pre the coronavirus pandemic in 2020 during his administration. He says the economy was doing well. Interest rates were low. Inflation was practically non-existent. So he's campaigning on his economic record. But for the Biden administration, for the Biden campaign, I should say, the president really needs to work on that messaging, because there are signs of improvement in the U.S. economy, but a lot of Americans aren't feeling that, particularly when it comes to the cost of goods and services.
Well, this is what I wanted to ask you, because actually, particularly recently, the economy is showing signs of bouncing back, but it's not necessarily bringing a boost for Biden, is it?
No, it's not. And I think that's very frustrating to his campaign at this point. Some of the messaging from his campaign has essentially been, look, this will pay dividends down the line, that, his economic policies will start to kick in a few months or, eventually down the line. The problem is that wait and see messaging, doesn't really work for voters who are frustrated. So, I think it's going to be tough for the president. But look, a lot can happen between now and November. I mean, if we start to see the economy continue to be on an uptick, maybe Americans will start to feel that. But right now, there's this perception among Americans, particularly when they're grocery shopping and, buying goods and services, that they're not feeling that. And they need to be able to feel that in order to really take the president at his word.
So what happens once the two candidates are formally chosen and we know who they are? Do we see then a change in the way that they speak about these issues? Will there be stronger rhetoric on things like the economy, for example, and immigration?
So we won't know. I mean, we'll know probably who the two candidates will be, if not after today, after a few weeks. And the writing, like I said, is on the wall. It seems like we're headed towards a Trump versus Biden matchup. But, in July and August, the Republican National Committee and the Democratic National Committee will hold their nominating conventions. And that's when it really becomes formal. Now, normally in presidential campaigns, before those nominating conventions in the summer, there's a lull period. You don't see as much in the news. The campaigns start to regroup, get ready for the convention. However, we see Biden and Trump already itching to start this general election battle. So I think we can see that messaging really start to sharpen within the next few days. But I think it already has sharpened.
Julia, great to talk to you today. Thank you so much for joining us. Julia Manchester from US website The Hill.